Oh, hey guys, Noah here, and you just caught me in the middle of reading my new book, Inconsequentialities and Other Unstoppable Forces. I actually started writing this book back in 2017, but I've only finished it just recently. But Noah, you're probably asking, why did it take you so long to write this book? Oh, that explains a lot. The year was 2016, and the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise was in a bit of a rut. The last game to be released by Sonic Team was Sonic Lost World in 2013 for the Wii U and Nintendo 3DS, and that game was alright at best, but suffered from a lack of consistent design and a new control scheme that wasn't fully realized. The following year was when the Sonic Boom sub-series was introduced to the world, a new branch of the franchise which included new designs for the characters, a new TV show on Cartoon Network, a new comic series, a whole new line of merchandise, and of course, 2 new video games as well. Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric for the Nintendo Wii U, and Sonic Boom Shadow Crystal for the Nintendo 3DS. And where did all this lead us? The TV show, being the most successful of the series, lasted only 2 seasons. The comic series lasted only 11 issues, the merchandise probably didn't do too amazing, and the video games together have formed the worst-selling Sonic games in history. Rise of Lyric was just your run-of-the-mill beat-em-up platformer which barely had anything that made it unique as a Sonic game, and Shadow Crystal was definitely better, but again, it didn't really stick out as a Sonic game, as it didn't really focus on high-speed platforming. After all of that, Sonic just seemed to disappear for a little bit, being restrained mostly to mobile games and a very meta Twitter presence. All of that changed at San Diego Comic-Con in 2016 when Sega hosted a 25th anniversary party for Sonic, where they revealed 2 new Sonic games to come out in 2017. Sonic Mania, a 2D retro-style game made in the classic Sonic style, and a new 3D Sonic game, which at the time was revealed as Project Sonic 2017. At the time, I was personally more excited for Project Sonic 2017, mostly because of the fact that, at the time, I was more into 3D Sonic games than I was 2D, but also because of the trailer that was shown. The world was being devastated by huge robots, modern Sonic was back in action, and even classic Sonic was joining in. For all intents and purposes, this was looking to be a sequel to Sonic Generations, which is still my favorite 3D Sonic game to date. As the months went on, more information was revealed for both titles, with Project Sonic 2017's final name revealed to be Sonic Forces, and after Sonic Mania came out in August of 2017, it was time for Sonic Forces to take center stage. And after a year and a half of build-up, what did we end up with? Well, let's take a look, if we must. The story begins with Dr. Eggman attacking an unnamed city with his robot army when Sonic arrives on the scene. He defeats the robots, but then he himself is quickly defeated by a number of his returning foes, including Shadow the Hedgehog, Metal Sonic, Chaos, and Zavok from Sonic Lost World. The Wii U and 3DS games that only sold 700,000 total copies, sure, why not? They are accompanied by a mysterious new foe who isn't really that mysterious if you watched any of the promotional material. Together they take down Sonic, and with the blue blur out of the way, Eggman takes over the world over the next 6 months. Apparently. All we get is this text telling us this information. Buckle in, folks, we're going to see a lot of that throughout this game. 6 months later, Sonic's friends are trying desperately to fight back, and they even enlist the help of your own custom avatar. But things don't look too good with Sonic seemingly dead. Until they find out Sonic is not seemingly dead. So the Resistance sends out your avatar to help them break Sonic out of the returning Death Egg. While all of this is happening, Tails has been off on his own ever since he lost it. Apparently. He looks fine, and he's even trying to repair his pal E123 Omega, but then he's ambushed by Chaos, who is properly disposed of by Classic Sonic? From Sonic Generations and Sonic Mania, 2 of the best Sonic games in recent years? Sure, why not? But why is he even here? Well, let me explain. After the true ending of Sonic Mania, Classic Sonic and this gem here called the Phantom Ruby were pulled into a portal which seems to have brought him into modern Sonic's time.
You're that Sonic from another dimension, aren't you?
Or into modern Sonic's dimensions? Okay, buckle in. In Sonic Generations, it was implied that we were playing as both a younger version of Sonic and an older version of Sonic. And now it seems that between that game, Sonic Mania, Sonic Forces, and the prequel comics for Sonic Forces, that after the events of Sonic Generations, Classic Sonic returned to a timeline now separated into a new dimension. So yes, the Sonic series now has a split timeline, one where modern Sonic has continued on since 2011, and a new one where Classic Sonic resides and runs in parallel. I honestly like this idea of an alternate dimension for Classic Sonic, but the problem is that all of this is merely implied and not outright properly explained. But enough of that, let's keep things moving. Classic Sonic saves Tails and they set off to find Eggman so they can stop this horrid war. Meanwhile, on the Death Egg, Sonic defeats Zavok, who mysteriously vanishes after his defeat, but Sonic doesn't really give it much thought and leaves. Eventually he comes across your Avatar, whom he saves, and they set off to help the Resistance. Eventually Sonic comes across that mysterious foe, you know, the one from the start of the game, and finds out that his name is Infinite. He uses a very mysterious power to defeat Sonic in a battle, and then just leaves.
Okay.
Elsewhere, Classic Sonic and Tails discovered that this Sonic, is alive, and after a quick bout with Dr. Eggman, they search for him in the Mystic Jungle. There they cross paths with your Avatar, right after he, she, they, it finds a small gem. Remember that for later. Now, with the heroes united, they set out to stop Dr. Eggman and Infinite. Not long after, Sonic runs into Shadow, who then runs into Shadow. And we find that Eggman has been working with prototypes for the Phantom Ruby. You know, this thing from Sonic Mania, and he gave the final version to Infinite. Remember that gem the Avatar picked up earlier? Well, that's one of those prototypes. It turns out the Phantom Ruby is able to create powerful illusions that can actually hurt people, explaining why Eggman was able to bring together so many of Sonic's past villains. Because he actually didn't. They're illusions.
They were fake.
Thus, the heroes set out to accomplish a needlessly complicated plan to eliminate the Phantom Ruby's power, and despite everything actually going according to plan, nothing goes according to plan. Not only does Eggman have a backup plan, Infinite follows up by trapping Sonic and the Avatar in null space, which they escape in literally 16 seconds. Sure, why not? Oh my god. They escape, and the entire Resistance joins forces to attack Eggman's base in one big final attack. Infinite attempts to drop the sun on our heroes, but the Avatar uses the Phantom Ruby prototype to make the sun disappear. Yeah, the sun is gone now. Everything dies. Sonic and the Avatar defeat Infinite, who just vanishes, and then they team up with Classic Sonic to whoop Eggman into the next game. Classic Sonic returns to his dimension.
Somehow.
The Avatar heads off onto their next adventure, and thank God this mundane plot is over. Honestly, this is the most disappointing story in the series so far. I was excited at the concept that was presented early on. Modern and Classic Sonic joining forces again, and having a customizable character taking back the world from a tyrannical ruler. This game's story had everything going for it, and I personally feel that they dropped the ball. Like the rest of the game around it, the story feels only half-baked, with very few memorable moments. Like the Phantom Ruby and Infinite, I was hoping for a better backstory for this cool-looking villain, but it's all kinda lame. It's actually all explained in Episode Shadow, an additional DLC episode, which lets you play as Shadow himself, taking place before the events of the main game. It's meant to showcase the rise of Infinite, as it shows Infinite has defeated E123 Omega, and that he and Shadow have some history. At some point before this reunion, Shadow defeated Infinite and his squad of Jekylls, and then calls Infinite weak. That is the, pardon the pun, weakest backstory for a character I've ever heard. And by the way, where was Shadow during the 6 months where Eggman took over? And what about Classic Sonic? He has absolutely no place in this plot other than to tie this game into Sonic Mania. All in all, I think we can agree that this game's story has a lack of focus, a lack of good writing, and just an overall lack of being good. Again, it's disappointing to see them fall flat in this department, but you know what? Plot has never been the strongest part of Sonic games, so the gameplay will definitely make up for it, right? Right? Hey, why did the music stop? Playable characters, all with their own styles of gameplay and level design. Let's start with Sonic. This Sonic. Modern Sonic. This game has modern Sonic return to the boost gameplay that was made popular in Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Colors, and Sonic Generation. Sonic can use the homing attack to zero in on enemies, a double jump, a stomp attack, quick step, slide, and of course, the Sonic Boost to blast through enemies, and of course go fast. However, despite this return to a game style that I personally love, I feel that this version of the boost gameplay is kind of half-baked. That's the second time I've said that. Keep that in mind. For starters, the double jump is barely any help in gaining height. For some reason, Sonic feels very heavy after jumping, like he plummets to the ground way too fast. And this applies to all three characters in the game, just as a heads up. The boost works fine enough, and in all fairness, the rest of Sonic's moves work well enough. But the main issue with this style of gameplay, and spoiler alert, the main issue with Sonic Forces as a whole, is the level design. The levels in this game are far too short, lasting up to 1.5 minutes. If you have even the slightest experience with playing video games, and the levels are also way too linear. There's not very much to explore with each level. The closest this game gets to exploration is the occasional alternate path in a level that only slightly deviates from the main path. and then returns to said main path about 3 seconds later. And when you're blasting through these already short levels at the speed of Sonic, the levels feel unfulfilling, like they end way too soon before they get their funky groove going. Like Egg Gate, taking place between various space stations with various paths connecting them, but again, it's over way too soon. Overall, modern Sonic is just not quite as fun to play with as in the previous games. Also, you can play as Shadow if you have the episode Shadow DLC, but he's basically just a skin for Sonic, as he plays exactly the same. I don't know, I just thought that was worth mentioning. It's kind of a neat feature, I guess. Let's talk about the Avatar next. Now, the Avatar actually has a lot of the same moves as modern Sonic, like the Stomp, Slide, and Homing Attack, which is actually a bit slower and sluggish compared to Sonic. However, the Avatar has access to Wisp-Bombs. Wisp-Bombs are weapons that are based on various wisps, which makes their return from Sonic Colors and Sonic Lost World. For those who are unaware, Wisps, in the Sonic series anyway, are small aliens which transform Sonic and give him various powers. They're back in Sonic Forces, and they're the inspiration for these Wisp-Bombs. Wisp-Bombs come in a couple different flavors, such as Flamethrower, Drill, Black Hole, and so on. However, between all of the Wisp-Bombs in the games, the best one is definitely the Flamethrower. It's efficient in defeating enemies, it doesn't bring you to a halt to use like most of the other Wisp-Bombs, and its Wisp power, the Burst, lets you jump over huge chunks of the levels. And fun fact, it's also the very first Wisp-Bomb you're given from the start of the game. See, each Wisp-Bomb has a corresponding Wisp, which, when collected, lets you use that Wisp power. Some of them are cool, like using the drill to burrow through enemies, but they're all very situational, meaning that there's not a lot of room for experimentation. There's only a couple of places in the entire minute-long level where they're useful. And of course, the Avatar levels suffer from the same problem that Sonic's levels have, being too short and too linear. In addition to having their own separate levels, there are even a few occasions in which Sonic and the Avatar team up in a level. And by a few occasions, I mean...
None of this is good, Vector. That's why it's called war.
These team-up levels basically control like Sonic levels, in which you also have access to Wisp-Bombs and Wisp powers, but again, the Wisps are still very situational and the pathways aren't very open to exploration. The one unique mechanic to these stages is the double boost feature, which I was excited for at first, but then I realized, like most of this game, it's kind of half-baked. When this prompt pops up, you have to mash the boost button to activate a boost that destroys all enemies and makes you completely invincible. Failing to do so makes you stumble for about 2 seconds, and then you do the boost anyway.
Wow, look how inconsequential this game is. Looks like it deserved to be the basis of my book after all.
Speaking of inconsequentialties, let's talk about Classic Sonic. Did you forget about him?
So did I.
In addition to having little relevance in the story, Classic Sonic also has little relevance in gameplay. Out of the 43 total stages, 22 of them you are allowed to play as Modern Sonic, 19 of them you can play as the Avatar, leaving only 8 in which you actually play as Classic Sonic. But maybe that's for the better, as Classic Sonic is probably the worst gameplay in Sonic Forces by far. Remember when I mentioned that Modern Sonic felt heavy when he double jumped? Well, you feel that tenfold with Classic Sonic. He drops like a cement block, and even on the ground he feels heavy and sluggish, as if he can't easily gain speed. In a game about gaining lots of speed. He has his spin dash still, but you can't just hold a button to use it like in Sonic Adventure or Sonic Generations. Normally, I wouldn't mind stopping to hold down and then mash a button if Classic Sonic wasn't so darn stiff. That's part of why I don't mind doing it in Sonic Mania, partially because of the better controls, but also thanks to the drop dash maneuver to keep the momentum going. In fact, the drop dash actually made its way over from Sonic Mania into Sonic Forces, and it actually works surprisingly well. I personally love the drop dash, and I hope it continues to appear in future Sonic games. But let's get back to Classic Sonic real quick. In short, Classic Sonic is sadly just a poor attempt at recreating the classic style of gameplay we're so familiar with. The level design is very basic and doesn't offer much in the way of extras or secrets or alternative pathways of reaching the goal. The levels are about as by the book as you can get. Since I don't really know where else to bring it up, I feel I should also mention that Super Sonic was later added to the game as downloadable content. Yeah, Super Sonic wasn't actually available in the game at launch. It was a separate download released about a month after the game's release, but to be fair, it was free for about a month. Then after that you'd have to pay $2 for the feature. Normally I would get upset about this, corporate greed and all that, but not long after that Sega actually backtracked on that feature, and now Super Sonic is free forever. Now I know I shouldn't give a company credit for fixing their mistake, but the fact that they actually listened to the fan feedback and fixed it instead of doubling down on a greedy decision is actually commendable. So there you have it. Sonic Forces has one redeeming factor so far. But let's immediately retract that factor. Supersonic, the Wisps, the Avatar, none of this matters when you remember the greatest flaws of this game. The levels being too short, too linear, and the controls being just plain ugly. I didn't even mention how the acceleration was all over the place. Your character will start building speed, and then out of nowhere, there's a burst of it that you can't control. Combine that with an incredibly stiff jump that doesn't let you move much once you're off the ground, and then also combine that with the short linear levels that, again, last barely any longer than a minute, and you have an uncomfortable journey that anticlimactically ends after only 3 hours. I guess now would be an alright time to start talking about the red rings. There are 5 red rings in every stage that's not strictly a boss stage, which after collecting them lets you collect 3 numbered rings, which must be collected in a numbered order. And by collecting those, you can collect 5 moon rings, which need to be collected within a certain time limit. My god, guys. Why didn't you put this level of artificially lengthening the game into making longer, better levels? It's hardly worth it anyway. All it unlocks is bonus levels and avatar costume pieces.
Oh my god. I almost forgot. The crown jewel of the entire game. You can play dress up with the avatar.
By completing various missions and collecting various collectibles, you unlock new items and articles of clothing to wear on your avatar. And no joke, this is my favorite part of the game. You can make him a pirate, a clown, various Sega characters, and everything in between. When you start the game, you can even choose the species of your avatar, each of which has specific abilities, such as attracting items, restarting with a number of rings, and so on. So there's already some good customization there. But while this is entertaining to watch in the game's cutscenes, it sadly isn't really enough to distract from the quality of the rest of the game.
Oh, come on, come on, come on. There has to be something positive to talk about in this game. What is that? What the?
I'm gonna pop it.
No!
I'm gonna pop it.
It's dangerous.
I'm gonna
I
pop
don't know what
it.
it is. No, we lost it. Don't be proud of yourself.
You know what? I am.
Graphics and music. Well, that was a freebie.
This game actually does look very nice. I want to say that the best factor of the graphics is the lighting effects, so I will. The best aspect of the graphics is the lighting effects, especially when utilizing the rays of the sun's light in the environments. It makes them really pop, and the texture quality is pretty good too. Honestly, this is probably the best looking Sonic game since Sonic Lost World on the Wii U. Now, I've mostly been referring to the PC version of Sonic Forces for this review, but originally back in 2017, I bought the Nintendo Switch version. Well, the only noticeable difference between these versions is that the graphical quality isn't as great as it is on PC. The textures, especially in TV mode, are definitely lower in level of detail, and the Switch version only runs at 30 frames per second, as opposed to 60 frames per second on all the other consoles. However, I don't think it's really that much of a downgrade, especially in handheld mode. You don't really notice these downgrades as much. But I think this is a good compromise, both in terms of Sonic Forces and also in the broader scope of bringing third-party games to the Switch, sacrificing graphics for portability. I think it's an understandable trade-off. The music, on the other hand, is hit and miss. I like a lot of the songs used in modern Sonic stages, but I feel like they use way too much synthesizer in each song. Maybe using less of it, or maybe using it more sporadically in every other song as opposed to every single song, but unfortunately, that's not the case. These songs really could have benefited from more live instruments. The Avatar's levels actually all have vocals and are styled a bit like techno music. And yeah, they are absolutely as corny and cheesy as you can imagine, but I kind of enjoy them anyway. What can I say? I like corny. My favorite is actually the song Virtual Enemies from the Capital City stage. In this stage, Infinite is using the Phantom Ruby to manipulate the resistance during a battle with illusions that wipe them out. Story about these virtual enemies that, as real as they seem, they're only illusions and they need to push through and keep fighting. Classic Sonic's music though, well, that's where the big misses start to appear. The instruments used themselves can be quite ear-graining at some points because of the notes played, and while some tracks are better than others, classic Sonic's music just is not that enjoyable to listen to. The worst thing about this is that the idea of classic sounding music in a modern Sonic game has worked for Sonic before. Look at Sonic Generations. In that game, the music was still written in classic style, but was performed with modern instruments, and it sounded fantastic. In Sonic Forces, not only do you have classic sounding melodies that aren't written as well, but you also have the composer trying to use a classic instrument style with modern technology. It just doesn't sit well with me. But you know what? At least the music on the menus is pretty good. Those pieces were actually performed by the London Symphony Orchestra, and they sound excellent. And in regards to the main theme, titled Fist Bump, I love it. It's upbeat, it's energetic, and I actually like the lyrics talking about teamwork and needing the other person. And while we're on the topic of cheesy songs, let's talk about the theme of Infinite. It is trying so hard to be dark and edgy, and despite sounding a bit like a Linkin Park song, I honestly enjoy it so much, unironically. It's still a shame that the most exciting thing about this new villain, however, is his theme song. Overall, I feel that Sonic Forces was just kind of a letdown. Again, this game had everything going for it. The return to beloved gameplay styles, the introduction of a customizable character, a more dramatic plot with an interesting premise, villains old and new teaming up, and all of it just feels, say it with me now, half-baked. This game also just doesn't have as much personality and style as previous games, even down to the animations. Look at Sonic and Sonic Generations. He's full of life, he's out there, he's expressive, he's a character. Now look at him in Forces. He's just going through the motions with bland, samey animations and moves. This is by no means the worst Sonic game, not by a long shot. But given how much potential I feel that this game had, I will say it's definitely the most disappointing game in the series so far. It was set up to be something great. Instead, we got another average Sonic game that is completely inconsequential. Speaking of inconsequentialties, I'm happy to let you guys know that my book is doing really well in sales right now.
Hey man, you got the stuff?
Oh, right here.
I got you your money.
I thank you.
Alright. I've been looking for something to start some fires with. Oh boy, we can go fit horses.